Ohio members of Congress take their stands on impeachment. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Sam Gresham of Common Cause Ohio, Joe Ingles, reporter for the Ohio Public Radio State House News Bureau, and Terry Casey, Republican strategist. For Ohio lawmakers, so far, President Trump's impeachment number 2 is very similar to impeachment number 1. 15 of Ohio's 16 members of Congress voted along party lines on whether to impeach the president for inciting a mob to attack the U.S. Capitol.
These insurrectionists believe Donald Trump's lies about the stolen election. They obeyed his call to attack. They literally carried his banner while storming the Capitol. Last week's insurrection was shocking and tragic. It was a culmination of 4 years of assaults on our democracy. We must impeach this president.
And Republicans have been consistent. We've condemned all the violence all the time. We condemned it last summer. We condemned it last week. We should be focused on bringing the nation together. Instead, Democrats are going to impeach the president for a second time 1 week before he leaves office.
Only Republican Anthony Gonzalez of Northeast Ohio broke ranks and voted for impeachment. He was one of 10 Republicans in Congress who voted against the president. Terry Casey, were you surprised that more Ohio Republican members of Congress did not vote to impeach? I'm thinking specifically about Steve Stivers. He kind of hinted he might be for impeachment the week before the vote, and then he didn't. He voted with the president and voted against impeachment, saying the process was too rushed.
I think one of the biggest questions as it goes to the U.S. Senate is what's really going to happen. And West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin summed it up pretty well. He raised the question of whether this will be an exercise in futility, because clearly this isn't going to get to the Senate till Joe Biden's president. The question is, what's the value of impeaching somebody who's already out of office? So I think the big question is, where does this really lead? And what's the timing? Because when Joe Biden is preaching unity, how does the Senate focus on moving his agenda forward, confirming his people, and doing an impeachment trial the way it's supposed to be done legally?
Given the strong words from those Republican members of Congress, though, Terry, and the pictures we saw at the State House during that insurrection, only one voted against the president. Why do you think that is?
I think part of it is the nature of his district. And I think one of the things that's going to be interesting that makes 2021 so unique is we've got to draw new congressional districts, and Ohio's probably going to lose one of its districts. So the question is, where does the shrinkage, where does the adjustment happen? Because clearly, especially in northeastern Ohio, there's been a lot of population shrinkage. So there's a lot of moving parts, including how districts are created. And obviously, Jim Jordan's a question, because does he run in the primary against Mike DeWine for governor? Is his district kept the same, changed much? There's a lot of layers to this puzzle.
There's no way Jim Jordan's district gets any less competitive than it is now. It stretches from Cincinnati to Lake Erie. Sam Gresham, what did you make of this? I mean, Democrats, this was the Republicans kept calling it a snap impeachment, and they weren't wrong. Now, these are extenuating circumstances. The president's leaving office. There was an insurrection at the Capitol. But did Democrats go too fast here?
No. And you must have accountability before we can have unity. People attacked the Capitol of the United States. They had maps, they had guns, they had weapons. We believe they were colluded by some of the Republican leaders and elected officials. No, if you don't take care of this now, you're going to have it all over the country again. These people need to pay, and they need to pay heavily. I don't think a tap on the arm is sufficient. 5 people died. They hit a police officer in the head with a, what was those things? Anyways, a metal container.
Yeah, fire extinguisher.
And no, we should not look for unity. We should not tap them on the head. We should strike them to the core of their existence for what they did.
Joe Ingles, I think an obvious reason is because of the districts are so gerrymandered, these Republican Congress people congressmen in Ohio, they have to basically satisfy the base, and 38% of Americans still feel that the election was stolen or there was some serious problems with it, even though there's no evidence of that.
Right, right. And I think what we're seeing right now is we have Trump Republicans and we have Republicans. And we saw that in the election, a lot of new voters were brought out to vote for President Trump. Are those new voters going to stick with the party, or are they going to go away? What will happen now with President Trump and his following? That's something that will be very interesting to watch as it pans out.
Terry Casey, what does Rob Portman do here? He's up for re-election in 2 years. He has supported the president once he got into office. He withdrew his endorsement before the election in 2016 because of the Access Hollywood tape, but since then he's been in support of the president and has been very reluctant to criticize him. He says he hasn't made up his mind. What does he do here? Does he wait to see what Mitch McConnell does to see if he gives him some cover?
Well, I think in some cases, waiting, his view is he wants to see the evidence. And obviously the big question for the Senate, because remember, it takes a 2/3 vote, 67 votes is what you got to have. The question is whether there's any chance of getting that large of a number. And it's entirely possible because there's some senators, including Democrats, basically saying this is not the highest priority right now. So Portman's position of being a good juror and waiting might be a dodge, but it also might be the smart, best way to handle it. Even Mitt Romney said he was kind of going to wait and see in terms of what happens. So I think it's a real question of when and if and how does it come to the Senate compared to all the other issues the Senate's facing.
Sam Gresham, do you see 17 Republican senators crossing? That's a lot of senators crossing over to vote to remove, not remove him, but penalize the president and keep him from running for office again.
Crossing, but I see them taking that vote, and each one of them paying a price if they make that vote. You know, it's interesting when we come to stuff like this. We coddle people who tried to destroy our country in the Civil War. We supported that flag, build statues to them. Here we go again. People who tried to destroy our form of government, we're coddling it. And the only reason we're coddling is because they're white people. If they're black people, that would not occur.
Terry Casey, this is the image of the Republican Party, at least a large portion of it right now. How does your party overcome that?
Well, I think one of the things people forget a little bit about history, I can remember 2009 in January, people believed the Republican Party wasn't just dying, that it was dead and buried. And then amazingly in 2010, Republicans came back, gained the majority in Congress, and things marched on from there. So politics on both sides has ups and downs. And there are people, particularly in the media, that like to declare one party or the other party dead, but it's amazing how things change, move, and shift.
Yeah, but 5 years after Watergate, a Republican was back in the White House with Ronald Reagan following Jimmy Carter. Joe Ingles, the key is Republicans, I think, they're worried about primary opponents in this next year, and they're trying to avoid those competitors from their own party. And that's what, like Jim Renacy's looking at Governor DeWine. Jim Jordan, Terry mentioned, is thinking about running for governor, possibly U.S. Senate. How worried are Republicans of primary opponents?
Well, I think they're worried about primary opponents, but I think they're also worried about uncertainties. Right now, if you look at what's going on, we don't have all the facts or the details about what exactly went down. We don't know if, someone did something that we don't know about right now. We don't know the president's involvement. There's a lot of things that still we want to, find out answers to as journalists. And until we know exactly what is happening, I think all of the lawmakers who are looking at a possible primary are kind of standing back saying, well, I don't want to jump too fast because I just don't know enough.
Terry Casey, how worried are Republican office holders, a guy like Mike DeWine, Rob Portman, sort of more moderate Republicans? How worried are they about primary opponents?
Well, Ohio's history has been that we've had some primaries, but generally you get multiple people running, which divides the anti-vote. And also in Ohio, we've had a pretty good tradition and history in primaries that there's a unique coalition between Main Street Republicans, courthouse Republicans, other type of Republicans that outweigh some of the activist side who might rise up. And remember, the primary, I think, is going to be in May, and that doesn't usually attract the big mass turnout unless you've got something really unusual happening. And remember, back in 2016, Trump came into Ohio with a lot of momentum, but he didn't win this state. So I think there's still a pretty moderate, middle of the road people that want to focus on winning in the fall. That's their direction, that's their priority.
Sam Gresham, one more question on this topic, and we'll move on to security at the State House. But if Donald Trump is acquitted again in the U.S. Senate, it is not precluded from running again in 2024. Does that, like it did kind of the last time he was impeached and was acquitted, he was able to say, I did nothing wrong, I'm exonerated. Does that not embolden his supporters even more?
Yes, I think it does, but it also emboldens his opposition. We saw what he did. We saw the buildup that he was doing to get to this thing. Sedition is not a very nice thing. You know, they wiped out the Black Panthers from Oakland, California to New York City on the assumption that they were going to do something, not anything they had done. And we're sitting here coddling people because they tried to be seditionists in this country. No, you don't let that go. You do what you have to do to punish, because if you don't, it's never going to go away. And I'm being redundant. The only reason they're doing is because these are white people. They are anti-American. They don't care about this country. They don't want to make a contribution to this country. They want to destroy this country.
All right, the Ohio State House is locked down in anticipation of possible protests this weekend. The FBI reportedly has warned local officials that state capitals, including Columbus, could be the scene of armed marches by far-right extremist groups. The State House is closed. Barricades surround it. Governor DeWine has ordered the State Highway Patrol and National Guard to be on hand to help local police. He says Ohio will not tolerate violent protests.
Just as we respect and will protect peaceful protesters, we will also just as vigorously resist violence.
What hate groups want is confrontation, to give them a platform and to amplify their message. Let's not give it to them.
Mayor Andy Ginther urging folks to stay home this weekend, counter-protesters that is. As extra officers and guard troops secure Capitol Square, leaders will not prohibit guns from State House grounds, even temporarily. Joe Ingles, what is the situation down at the State House? It's far more secure than it's been in a long time.
Yeah, and far more secure than I've ever seen it in my recent memory. So, you know, the thing is right now, they don't know what they're dealing with. But we have seen through the course of the week, they have added more and more and more security. They are telling the State House employees and downtown employees to stay home if possible, do not be out there. And one of the things that we don't really know is how many people are actually going to show up, what they're going to do. There's a lot of chatter out there that none of us are privy to, but maybe the security folks are. And so it just remains to be seen, but they don't want a bunch of counter protesters down there because that adds more fuel to the fire, and they've already got, you know, issues if they get a lot of people there with guns and that sort of thing. Yeah,
there was one counter protester, I believe it was last week, during one of these pro-Trump protests, was punched by a pro-Trump supporter. It's a minor scuffle, not serious injuries, but you could just see how it could escalate. Terry Casey, why not prohibit guns temporarily on State House grounds, just to keep people safe?
Well, my view is that the city and the state officials learned a lot this summer in terms of what happened, how to control, how to separate people. So I think the fact that, as Joe indicated, I don't think you're going to have the counter protesters there. It's wintertime. I think things are going to go smoothly. You can debate whether or not guns on the property or near the State House, but in general, I think the state and the county, state and city people have prepared well. They know what might come, and so I think that's going to scare away any potential problems or significant difficulties.
Sam Gresham, one of the lessons from this summer was, I think Columbus police learned that if you come to a demonstration dressed in riot gear with helmets and batons and face shields and tactical gear, that escalates the situation right away. It seems like, we don't know yet, but it seems like the Highway Patrol and the National Guard and the city are going to show up just that way, ready for, a fight. Is that possibly counterproductive, do you think? Could it escalate things with this protest?
I think it's hard to measure that. What you do is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. You don't want to be caught off guard thinking these guys are going to be a walk in the park and they tear up the State House. You don't want that. But again, this is an example of after they stormed the Capitol, now they are threatening 50 state capitals. This is not a walk in the park. This is not something you just forget. No, they're threatening this country. They attacked the national capital, and now they're threatening 50 states. Who do you think these people are? And let me end on your question. I think if they don't prohibit guns, there are going to be people who are coming to protest them with guns.
Sam, people will point out that the social justice protests over the summer, they resulted in broken windows at the State House, graffiti at the State House. Is there a comparison between there and these folks and those folks?
I criticize those people too. I don't think that was necessary. But the only thing I'm going to say to you, they attacked the capital of the United States of America. That is declaring war. That is sedition. That's not writing graffiti on a wall. That's not screaming out words that are not appropriate. They attacked. And I'm coming from a position that I was a United States Marine. And I know what I did for this country, and I won't tolerate that. I'm not coddling these people, and we should not coddle them. Now, if they let people come with guns, I'm going to guarantee you there are going to be some people who are not those types with guns.
Joe Ingles, in Washington,
they hate them.
Joe Ingles, in Washington, they've shut down the National Mall, which is incredible, for the inauguration. You can't gather on the mall to see the new president of the United States sworn in, which is just incredible. Why in Columbus are they not blocking off more than, say, just the 10 or 12 yards around the State House? Why not block off Capitol Square or maybe they are blocking off other parks, but I don't know.
Well, we asked about that, and it seems like they're trying to see what they need to do. If they need to block off city streets down there, we saw during the protests in the summer that they can block those streets very quickly. That's something that can be done, and I'm sure that if they see a reason to do that, they will do that. I think that they really don't know exactly what to expect. I think we go back to that point. And with the situation being what it is, they think that they can control the crowd if they just keep the crowd out on the State House grounds, off right on that perimeter. Yep. So anyway, we'll see.
Terry Casey, obviously you're not going to be a part of this group. This isn't your wing of the Republican Party. So I won't ask you to speak for them. I just kind of want you to speculate a little bit. I mean, they say that their rights are being trampled upon, that their rights are being taken away. What rights exactly have been taken away in the last 4 years, the last 12 years, heck, the last 20 years? What are they hoping to accomplish, and what exactly rights have they lost over the past 2 decades?
Well, to be blunt, some of these people, particularly in D.C. a week ago, they were nutcases who aren't rational, reasonable kind of people to think that you can do violence and those kind of things. So, but I think in Columbus, they're going to be well prepared because between the city and the state, they've got the resources. And the good thing about the State House lawn, when you've got a big open area like that, it's easier to control, see who's coming from where. There's less places for people to hide. But I think the word's out, and if you're one of these nutcases and you know there's going to be serious force there, and a lot of them do respect law enforcement. Some do, some don't.
Yep.
But I think they're going to realize the odds are against them, and I think they're going to be hopefully busy on other things and not trying to cause trouble.
Let's hope it's one of those situations like the weatherman says that there's going to be 10 feet of snow. We ended up with like a quarter inch of rain. Let's just hope that's what happens here in this weekend in Columbus. Anyway, this coming week, Ohioans who are 80 and older can get a COVID-19 vaccine, but they basically have a 1 in 4 chance of getting a shot because the state will only have about a quarter of the doses it needs to vaccinate everyone in just that population.
The big picture on vaccine always comes back to this: we don't have enough. We hope that this is going to increase as we move forward. We hope that will be additional streams flowing in.
The state's COVID website has a tool for people to find vaccination sites. There will be 72 sites in Franklin County. The virus continues to spread at a very high rate across the state. Ohio State University this week announced it has discovered a strain of the virus similar to the one spotted in Great Britain. That strain in the UK made the coronavirus much more contagious than the original strains. No word on how contagious this new strain is. Sam Gresham, and we found out on Friday that we may have even less vaccine than we thought we were going to get. What do you make of how this vaccine is being rolled out? We're trying to vaccinate millions, billions of people in a fairly short time. Is this just growing pains and getting the system up and running, or is there something more than that?
No, it's incompetence on the part of the people who were given the responsibility to roll this stuff out. Everything associated with the Trump administration illustrates ignorance, incompetence, and abilities. And plus, the Republicans at this time have an interesting habit. They cannibalize their own. They're going after Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, talking about impeaching him because he's doing the right thing. This is an interesting time. No, it was incompetence. And even at this point, the group that is hurt the most, that's people of color, still don't have a special plan for them to get the vaccine or any programming to keep them from getting the virus. They have just jettisoned the Black community, both in the state of Ohio and in most national communities, except for ones that are dominated by African-American people. No.
Joe Ingles, what is the basic strategy of the DeWine administration when it comes to distributing this vaccine to try to make sure it's distributed fairly geographically? I think the governor is trying to distribute it fairly across all racial lines, socioeconomic lines. What is the bottom line strategy he's trying to do here?
Well, basically everything is delegated locally. There's not like one place in the state where you go and sign up and then you can figure out where to go. You go to each of the local vendors. You can find out on the state website who is offering it. And, you know, if you want to go to the Kroger or if you want to go to the health department, you go to those individual places and you schedule your vaccine. What Sam is speaking about is maybe taking things into neighborhoods, into special situations. And, you know, Governor DeWine is saying that as this rolls out more and they get more vaccine and it's available, he thinks that we might start seeing some changes that would make it more user-friendly. For example, we could see on the weekends, having places where it would be offered on the weekends. We could see some of these changes. But right now, the biggest problem is there's just not enough vaccine to go around.
Terry Casey, is this the right strategy, letting the local folks handle it? So the feds have kicked it to the states, now the states are kicking it to the local folks. Is that a good strategy?
Well, Ohio is still a very diverse state, and if you tried to have one size fits all, everybody's got to come to the Schottenstein Center on the OSU campus. That wouldn't be fair to people that live in medium-sized counties, smaller counties. So it's going to take a little while, but I think the light at the end of the tunnel is that by end of February, we're going to have probably Johnson & Johnson and maybe one other company's vaccine approved or nearly approved. So as we get a month and a half by now, we very probably are going to have 4 vaccines. The supply is going to be a lot better. So I think the fact that there's light at the end of the tunnel is very good. And I can remember in October when some of Sam's political friends said there'll never be a vaccine developed by the end of 2020, and it actually did happen. So there's been some progress. There's more to come. And I think what the governor's doing is smart because, again, Ohio's such a diverse and big state.
All right, let's get to our off-the-record parting shots. Sam Gresham, you're up first.
I want people out there to realize you're living through history. There's a clear examples of how government can be incompetent if you elect the wrong person. And that model should follow not only for national, but for the state. Incompetence is a disease.
Terry Casey.
Circle February 1st on your calendar. That's when the state budget will be unveiled. And the good news so far, Ohio is ahead of the pack on revenue. We're not like some of these states where we need a federal bailout, but doing that next 2-year budget is going to be tough and challenging because we're starting to see in the last month retail sales slow down.
Yeah.
So get ready for the first half, especially in May and June, a rocky road at the State House, and it won't be because of protesters.
Joe Ingles, 15 seconds.
No. Okay, they're telling people not to go protest downtown, but people who want to send a message, some of the groups are saying, go volunteer, go frequent a Black-owned business, go learn more about Dr. King himself. So there are ways to make your voice known on that day without appearing at the corner of Broad and High.
Good advice there. Stick with WOSU for all your inauguration coverage next week. WOSU TV and 89.7 NPR News will have live coverage from NPR and PBS. For our crew, for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week. Stay safe.